I think as a guitar player, you get into tube amps just kind of inadvertently because the best sounding guitar amps are all tube amps, and that's kind of part of where it comes from. But when I was a kid, I'm old enough, everything was still tube. When I was a kid, our TV was filled with tubes, our radio was tubes, everything was tubes, so I grew up with that. So that's a sound I'm familiar with.
It's nice to have a shop that I know will carry some vintage stuff too, and have access to things that would probably be hard to find, even online, or would be really expensive or something. Yeah, I like the fact that I can pop in there and he's usually in there, and just to say hi.
And that's one thing that's unique about Eric is he has all these old school, old time caps, tubes. That's why he's called the Tube King.
I'm Eric Lovre, and I run the Tube King in Salem, Oregon. I started doing this kind of stuff because in the 90s, after the Dharma Bums broke up, I wanted to have my own recording studio. So I was going around to junk places, buying ruined recording equipment for a few dollars. Old tube, you could buy. People were throwing analog stuff out left and right. So I was buying up junk tape recorders and tube amps and preamps and hi-fi gear and microphones and everything I could find and restoring them myself. I'd kind of gotten into electronics when I was a kid. So I built crystal radios and things, when I was a kid. So I had a grip on it a little bit. So yeah, just in order to have my own, it all came from wanting to have my own studio. I had an amp in here about 6 years ago that had belonged to James Burton, and he toured with Elvis Presley. And this had toured with Elvis in the early 70s. And I thought that was cool as hell, to be working. It was number 5. It was a big white Fender, which they didn't make in the 70s. Fenders were black in the 70s, but this was a 70s silver face that had been done white for Elvis specifically for that tour.
I've heard the Tube King, I've heard that name for many years floating around Salem. He was recommended to me for my Blues Deluxe amp I've had for like 10 years. Finally, I want to say I went like 6 years without changing the tubes. So I'm surprised it worked at all. But I was having a bunch of issues, and sure enough, I needed new tubes. So he was the guy. He's helped me a ton. He actually totally changed the way my amp sounded just by experimenting with what tubes to use, which I thought was really cool. And he kind of took the time to figure out the sound. So, he helped me with just getting a good sound out of my amp. I don't really know anywhere else in Salem that specializes in that. The work he does, we all, as musicians, we all benefit from the work he does. I've talked to many people in this town who've gone to him for help. This is highly valuable to us as a musician.
There are technicians that can work on tube equipment, but they don't really know how they should sound. And he knows how they should sound and make sure they sound fantastic.
I first saw him play music when I was probably 12 or 11 or 12. He was a third or fourth generation Silverton person. His family came here in covered wagons and settled in the area in Silverton where we are. And his dad was a farmer who had, hundreds of acres, huge farm and stuff. So Eric was, and he was brought up in the Lions Halls and in the community stuff that was there in Silverton. I saw him and Jim Tolstra play rockabilly at a talent show at the high school, and I was still in junior high school, right? And I didn't even know his name at that point yet, and I'm watching this guy who literally, I kid you not, was Johnny B. Good. He had a white shirts with rolled up and pompadour, and he had his 60s Mustang that he still owns to this day, and he was ripping it up. And they were doing Chuck Berry and stuff, and I was just like, that guy. Eric had that kind of background. He was like Bruce Springsteen running, you know, from one end of the building to the other with his cord flailing, and he was just as astute a guitar player at 16 and 17. He was already there at 16, 17 years old as a guitar player to you know how he's revered now as a guitar player. But I mean, I swear to God, dude, he was already there, you know. I ended up moving to Seattle years later and stuff, and Mike McCready of Pearl Jam told me a story about how he and his friends would drive no matter how far, when they were still teenagers and stuff like that, would drive no matter how far it was to come and see the Darn Bums play. And he specifically mentioned because that Eric Lovre guy, you know, could just rip it up.
He saw me buy a Gretsch guitar exactly like what he had, a Streamliner. He invited me to come play rhythm guitar in his band. I about had a cow. I used to play rhythm guitar when I was a kid back in the 60s and 70s, you know, with garage bands and everything, and I just loved it. Everybody said, oh, get Chris on rhythm. He can hold the beat and all that. And so I was just totally thrilled to play with his band. So I played with him for about a year.
It's been fun to watch him perform in Eric Lovre band and do his thing, and he's kind of adding to the culture of this town with his performing while also, you know, getting to work on amps.
We could go search around this studio right now, and I could find you probably little like little containers or something that will have like knobs or screws in it and stuff, and then I'll be like, oh, that's Eric. You know, for Eric. Eric has been into electronics since the day I met him. Eric was really into electronics, and on my side, my dad and I were carpenters. So Eric and I built the PA system that we used for years. So me and my dad built the PA boxes, and then he and his dad installed the electronics.
He's got such a well-rounded knowledge of all tube amplifiers, which is killer. When I met Eric, he found out I had a Supro amp that I played harmonica through, and it needed tube work and everything, so I thought, well, I'm going to check out Eric and see how he does and everything. Went down and talked with him, and he was all excited to see the amp because he'd never seen one before. It's a very rare amp. I've only seen two, and he was just thrilled to work on it. He says that's the same amp that Led Zeppelin guitar player used in the studio all the time. And I go, really? And so he put new tubes in it for me and got it honking really good, and it's the loudest harmonica amp I've ever had, except for my new Supro.
I like the tube stuff a lot. I like the sound of the tube electronics. I think the interesting thing about it is that I like it because it's an organic feeling thing. I have a massive collection of vintage microphones and old recording gear, and it all works flawlessly most of the time. And if not, I put on the white lab coat and I fix whatever it is. And I just go out every other day and search out old bombed out equipment for really cheap and then fix it myself, and pretty soon, within about a year or two, I had more gear than anybody else in the world. It was pretty good, you know. And then I still have some of that original stuff that I restored 25 years ago, you know. I started the shop to support playing music, which, you know, I basically made a living until I was about 30 doing rock and roll music, but I didn't want to play all the time anymore, so I started doing this. Rock and roll, I mean, it's a museum piece, is what it is. It's the past. It's the 20th century. 20th century is in the process of dying slowly. You know, Little Richard just died. John Prine just died. Peter Green just died. Emmett Rhodes just died. Rock and roll is dying. The real thing is dying. And I feel like one of the luckiest people in the world, actually, because I got to grow up during the period when those type of people were in their prime, you know? I mean, we were rock and roll guys. There was no funny little subcultures like indie and this and that and the other thing. It was just rock and roll when we were kids, you know, and it was all one big thing. So it is, the culture of it has already left us. The music is, in my opinion, one of the great American art forms. Same as blues, country, jazz music. It's one of the great American art forms. It's one of the only places, the only art forms where every stream of life and every race of people blend together in perfect unity. And that's what rock and roll music did. It brought everybody together, the entire friggin' world. And that has gone back to the way it was before, where everybody is separating off into their little tribes, becoming more tribal again. Rock and roll was an attempt, I think, socially to bring everybody together. It was a big, you know, bring the cultures together, because there's no other form of music that includes every other form of music within it except rock. Jazz, blues, country, everything. So how an art form transfers into a different time, I don't know. Rock and roll lasted longer than it was supposed to, you know. It outlasted all the predictions, you know.
I'm hoping that he keeps continuing building and working on amplifiers for people. Anybody asks me who they should have work on their amp, I say, you need to go see Eric at Tube King.
Well, I hope to see more of him, really. The bar scene's being closed down and not being what they used to be. It doesn't have the venues that you'll see him at. So he's a special musician. He likes originality, and so he doesn't care for the sing-along bands. I hope he continues to do what he loves to do.
I've decided that the last thing that I'm going to do in music over the next however many years I have left on this planet is do music that is proof, or to kind of prove that rock and roll is a great art form, doing more of a pure form of rock and roll, roots kind of rock and roll music, and kind of try to give it some credibility again, because I've been doing records over the last number of years, and I'll have one or two kind of rootsy rock and roll songs on it, and those are the ones people always are responding to. And so I keep thinking, you know, there's people who want to hear that still, you know, who want to hear that kind of rock.